Good morning, dear friend. Or perhaps it's evening where you are, and you've finally carved out a quiet moment for yourself. Either way, I'm so grateful you found your way here today. Pour yourself something warm if you'd like. Tea, coffee, whatever brings you comfort. Get cozy. This is meant to be like sitting at a kitchen table with someone who's walked this road. Someone who spent 4 decades learning about the landscape of long-term love and is now living in it herself, in her early 70s. I want to start by acknowledging something that might be true for you right now. You might be feeling a little lost in your relationship. Maybe not in crisis, but somewhere in between contentment and confusion. You've been with this person for 20, 30, 40 years, and somewhere along the way, something shifted. The ease you once felt has become complicated. The connection that was automatic now requires intention. And that can be heartbreaking, especially when you've already invested so much. I've spent over 40 years as a family psychologist, sitting across from hundreds of couples in my office. I listened to their stories, held their pain, helped them navigate the impossible moments. And in my own life, in my own marriage, I've lived through nearly everything I once helped others understand from a clinical distance. The empty nest when the kids finally left. The retirement years when suddenly my partner and I had too much time together and somehow not enough to say. The resentment that builds quietly, grain by grain, until you're both wondering how you got here. Today, I want to share what I've learned from both sides of that therapeutic relationship. Not as a doctor speaking down to a patient, but as a human being who knows what it feels like to sit beside someone you love and feel, paradoxically, alone. Before we go any further, though, I need to be honest with you about what this is and what it isn't. What I'm sharing today are my personal reflections, the wisdom and the hard-won lessons from my own journey, both professionally and personally. This isn't therapy. It's not clinical advice designed specifically for your unique situation. It's not a prescription. Think of it instead as a warm conversation between friends, one who has some experience and one who's seeking to understand. Every relationship is beautifully, frustratingly unique. What worked for me, what helped the couples I treated, might not be the right path for you. And that's okay. You know your relationship better than anyone else ever could. You know the texture of it, the history, the specific language you two share. If you're facing serious difficulties, if there's abuse involved, if there's addiction, if there's a crisis of safety or well-being, please don't let this conversation be your only resource. Reach out to a licensed professional who can truly see your situation, who can meet you where you are. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Some situations need more than tea and reflection. They need real professional support. With all that said, let's begin. Let's talk about finding peace with your partner in these later years of life. Not just getting along, not just settling, but actual peace. The kind where you can sit in comfortable silence. The kind where you feel genuinely seen, even after all these years. The couples I saw most often after 50 were experiencing something similar. They described it in different ways. We've grown apart. We're just roommates. I don't recognize him anymore. She's become someone I don't know. But underneath those variations was a common thread, an unexpected distance that had grown between two people who once felt inseparable. This phenomenon surprised many of the couples who experienced it. They'd made it through the early chaos, the early kids, the career building, the financial stress of raising a family. They'd navigated the teenage years. They'd survived the moment when everyone finally moved out. And they'd thought, now we can finally have our life back together. But instead of rediscovering each other, they sometimes discovered they'd become strangers. Why does this happen? I think it's because we underestimate how much our lives can shift when we're no longer living around children, around work obligations, around the structure that held us together. When that structure disappears, we're left with the relationship itself. And if we haven't been tending to that relationship while everything else was demanding our attention, it can look surprisingly empty. One couple I remember very well, let me call them Margaret and Tom, came to see me about 6 months into Tom's retirement. Tom had been a financial analyst for 40 years. His entire identity was wrapped up in his work. Margaret had worked part-time and had been the primary parent. When Tom retired, he suddenly had 12 or 14 hours a day of free time. Margaret was used to her rhythms, her volunteer work, her lunch dates with friends. She wasn't equipped to fill that void. And Tom, for the first time in decades, didn't know who he was without his job. They found themselves in the same house, but on completely different paths. Tom wanted Margaret to join him in his newfound leisure. Margaret felt that his sudden availability was an intrusion on the life she'd carefully built. Neither was wrong. They were just experiencing the same transition differently, and they hadn't talked about what they actually wanted from this new phase. This is often what I see. Not a failure of love, but a failure of communication. Or more specifically, a failure to recognize that communication itself needs to evolve. After decades of marriage, many couples fall into patterns that were never explicitly discussed. You know how your partner takes their coffee. You know which topics will create tension. You know which silences are comfortable and which are loaded. But sometimes that intimacy of knowing becomes a substitute for actual seeing. You assume you know what your partner thinks, what they need, what they're feeling. And often, you're wrong in the most subtle ways. I remember in my own marriage, and this is the vulnerable part I promised you, there was a period of about 3 years where my husband and I barely had a real conversation. We'd talk about logistics. Did you pay the electric bill? What time is your appointment? We need groceries. But we weren't talking about us. We weren't asking each other real questions anymore. We'd been married for so long that we thought we'd already asked all the important questions. We were wrong. What nobody tells you is that even after 30 years, your partner is still evolving. They're changing. Their values might be shifting. Their priorities might be realigning. Their fears might be becoming more acute. And if you're not checking in, if you're not maintaining a practice of genuine curiosity about each other, you'll wake up one day and realize you don't actually know this person anymore. They've grown, and you've been standing still, assuming you already knew the end point. The practical problem here is that couples over 50 often have less social permission to struggle with this. You're supposed to have it figured out by now. Your marriage is supposed to be stable. If there's distance, it feels like a failure, like you did something wrong. But I'm here to tell you, this distance is almost universal. It's part of the arc of long-term relationships. The question isn't whether it will happen. The question is what you do when it does. Here's what I learned from 4 decades of listening to couples. The difference between couples who make it through this phase of life with their connection intact and those who don't rarely comes down to love. Both groups love their partner. The difference is in how they communicate. And I don't mean just talking more. Sometimes couples tell me they talk plenty. The issue is that they're not talking in a way that actually lands. They're not creating space for real listening. Let me describe what I mean by this. Real listening isn't waiting for your turn to talk. It's not formulating your response while your partner is still speaking. It's not trying to problem solve or defend yourself. Real listening is the temporary suspension of your own agenda so that you can genuinely understand what the other person is trying to communicate. I learned this from my clients, and I had to learn it again in my own marriage. One simple practice changed everything for us. Weekly check-ins. Not date nights, though those matter too. I mean structured time, maybe 30 minutes, where one person speaks about what's happening for them and the other person listens. Not interrupting. Not offering solutions unless asked. Just listening. The speaker might say something like, "I've been feeling pretty lonely lately. I know we're together, but I feel like we've become more like business partners than lovers. I'm not blaming you. I'm just telling you what's true for me right now." And then the listener's job is to hear that, to reflect back what they heard. It sounds like you're experiencing some loneliness in our connection, and you miss feeling more romantically close. And then to ask, "Tell me more about that." That's it. That's the whole exercise. And somehow, in doing this simple thing regularly, couples begin to remember who they're actually married to. Because here's what happens in long-term relationships. You develop what I call relational scripts. You know exactly how certain conversations will go. You predict your partner's response before they give it. And because you've predicted it, you react to your prediction, rather than to what they're actually saying. This means you're never really responding to your real partner. You're responding to a version of them that exists in your mind. Breaking these scripts requires deliberate practice. One technique that works beautifully is what I call the speaker-listener structure. One person is the speaker, one is the listener. The speaker shares something important to them. The listener's only job is to listen fully, to ask clarifying questions if needed, and to reflect back what they heard. No debate, no fixing, just listening and reflecting. Another practice I recommend is something very simple. Ask open-ended questions. Not, "Did you have a good day?" but, "What was the most interesting thing that happened to you today?" Not, "Are you okay?" but, "What's on your mind today?" These small changes in language create more space for real conversation. And then there's the practice of stating things from your own experience, rather than making accusations. Instead of, "You never listen to me," it's, "I feel unheard when we have these conversations." Instead of, "You're always irritable," it's, "I've noticed you seem more stressed lately, and I'm wondering if something is happening for you." This shift from accusation to observation, from about them to about me, fundamentally changes the way the other person can receive what you're saying. I also encourage couples to take breaks when conversations get heated, not avoiding the issue, but pausing, taking a 20-minute break, going for a walk, coming back when you're less reactive. And this is so important. You have to agree ahead of time that taking a break isn't abandonment. It's a tool for keeping the conversation safe. One more thing that made a profound difference in my own relationship was gratitude. Sounds simple, almost too simple. But the practice of regularly expressing what I appreciate about my partner shifted something fundamental, not performance appreciation. "Thank you for doing the dishes." Though that's nice too, but deeper appreciation. "I appreciate how you've always been willing to grow, even when it's uncomfortable. I appreciate that you try to understand me even when I'm not making much sense." This practice of noticing and naming what's right about your partner, what you value in them, it's revolutionary. And here's something they don't tell you. Gratitude is actually a perspective shift. When you're regularly looking for things to appreciate, you start seeing your partner differently. The neural pathways in your brain actually rewire. You start noticing the good things rather than the things that frustrate you. This isn't positive thinking. It's neuroplasticity. It's science. Now I want to talk about something that many couples over 50 struggle with, but rarely discuss openly: intimacy. And I want to be clear. I'm not talking only about sex, though I'll get there. I'm talking about all the ways we connect with each other physically and emotionally, the whole spectrum of touch and closeness. In my years of practice, I found that couples in their 60s and 70s often carry shame about their desire for physical connection. There's this cultural narrative that says sexual interest is something you age out of, that it's somehow undignified to want your partner that way. I'm here to tell you plainly, that's wrong. That's a lie we tell ourselves based on outdated ideas about aging. The research on this is beautiful, actually. Many older adults who are in relationships report that they're having more satisfying sexual lives than they did when they were younger. Why? Because they know themselves better. They know what they like. They're less concerned with performance. They have more time. They have more privacy. They can be more authentic. But, and this is important, many couples do experience changes in their sexual function as they age. Hormonal changes, health issues, medications, natural shifts in energy and desire. This is not failure. This is reality. And when couples approach these changes with curiosity and compassion, rather than shame and disappointment, they often discover new ways of being intimate. I remember one couple, Patricia and Robert, who came to me believing that a decline in Robert's sexual function meant the end of their intimate life. They'd been married 50 years. They loved each other deeply, but they were treating this natural change like a tragedy rather than a transition. We talked about what intimacy actually meant to them. Patricia realized that what she missed most wasn't necessarily sex, but the feeling of being desired, of being close to Robert's body, of that non-verbal communication of love. Robert realized that he was so focused on performance that he'd stopped enjoying the experience of being close to his wife. Once they stopped thinking about intercourse as the only legitimate form of intimate connection, they discovered that they could enjoy touch in many other ways. This is what I mean by intimacy beyond the body. Though touch is absolutely part of it, I mean the whole ecology of closeness, the way you greet each other, how you sit together, whether you hold hands, whether you hug, whether you kiss, whether you linger when you embrace. These micro moments of physical connection are profound. There's something we know from neuroscience. Physical touch literally changes our brain chemistry. When we embrace someone we love for more than 20 seconds, our body releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It reduces cortisol, our stress hormone. It lowers blood pressure. It creates a felt sense of safety and belonging. For couples, regular physical affection isn't a luxury, it's a foundation. I encouraged couples to practice what I call intentional touch. It doesn't have to be sexual. It can be a hand on the shoulder, a hand held during a conversation, a hug for no particular reason, sitting close while reading or watching something together. These small, deliberate moments of physical connection create continuity. They say, "You're important to me. I want to be near you." For couples navigating sexual changes, I often recommended something called sensate focus, a practice where partners take turns exploring touch without any goal of sexual performance. One person gives gentle touch, and the other simply receives it, noticing sensations. It might be on the shoulders, the back, the hands. The point is presence, attention, sensation, without any pressure or expectation. This can rebuild comfort with physical touch and often leads to a richer, intimate life. And here's something important. If one partner wants more physical intimacy than the other, this isn't a problem to be solved, but a conversation to have. What does the person wanting more actually need? Is it sex? Is it affection? Is it to feel desired? These are different things, and sometimes they have different solutions. And what's driving the partner who wants less? Is it fatigue? Is it stress? Is it changing desire? Is it body image? These are real things to explore, not just to dismiss. I also want to say this clearly. As we age, our bodies change. We may not feel as attractive as we once did. Our bodies may feel different to us. But here's what I know from having been in a long-term relationship. Your partner isn't seeing what you think they're seeing. They're seeing the person they've loved for decades. They're seeing the life you've lived together written on your bodies. That's beautiful. There's something that happens in long-term relationships that I want to address directly because it's so common and so corrosive, the accumulation of small hurts into resentment. By the time couples reach 50 or 60, they've potentially experienced 30 or 40 years of moments where they felt unseen, unappreciated, or hurt. Most of these moments are small. Your partner forgot something you mentioned. They were dismissive about something that mattered to you. They didn't help when you needed help. They were irritable. They weren't present. Small things. But small things accumulate. They're like water wearing away stone. And if they're never addressed, they create a layer of resentment so thick that you can barely see the person underneath. I saw this pattern repeatedly in my practice. A couple would come in and I'd ask, "What brought you here?" And often the answer would be vague. We're not happy. We feel disconnected. But when we dig deeper, there would be this mountain of unaddressed hurts. One woman, Margaret, I think I've seen many Margarets, told me she was angry with her husband almost all the time, but she couldn't quite articulate why. When we explored it, it turned out she was carrying resentment from something that had happened 5 years ago that she'd never actually told him about. She'd been hurt, she'd withdrawn, and she'd been quietly furious ever since. He had no idea. The problem with resentment is that it becomes like a filter through which you see everything. Your partner does something kind, and you interpret it through your resentment. He's only being nice because he feels guilty. Your partner makes a mistake, and you don't extend grace. Here we go again. He's so careless. Resentment doesn't just hurt your relationship. It literally changes your perception of reality. So what do you do with it? You have to address it. Not by complaining about everything you're resentful about. That often just intensifies the negativity. But by identifying the core hurts and actually talking about them. This looks like, "I want to bring something up that's been sitting with me. I know it's old, but I realize it's still affecting how I feel. A few years ago, when you forgot my mother's birthday dinner, I felt like you didn't care about what matters to me. I've never really processed that with you, and I think I've been carrying it as resentment. I'm telling you now because I want to move beyond it." That takes courage, and it requires the other person to really listen, to validate the hurt even if they didn't mean to cause it, and to understand the impact of their actions even if that impact wasn't what they intended. Once the hurt is articulated and received, something magical can happen. The resentment begins to dissolve. Not immediately, not completely, but the act of being witnessed, of having your pain acknowledged, is profoundly healing. There's also something about aging that makes this work more urgent. The time we have left is finite, and if you spend it carrying resentment, you're wasting it. I don't say that to be harsh. I say it to be honest. When you're in your 70s, you know the math. You don't know how many years you have left. Do you want to spend them furious? Or do you want to spend them in whatever peace you can find? This doesn't mean you have to forgive everything. Some hurts are real and significant, but it does mean choosing to name them, to work through them, rather than letting them ossify into permanent walls between you. Another practice I found helpful is what I call repair attempts. This is something that happens immediately after a conflict or a difficult moment. One person reaches out with a gesture, sometimes humor, sometimes tenderness, sometimes a simple, "I love you, and I don't want to be at odds with you." The other person either accepts the repair or extends it. This practice prevents hurts from accumulating by tending to them right away. I also found that couples benefited from what I might call relational auditing, periodically reviewing what's working and what's not. I had many couples do this once or twice a year, sitting down together and saying, "What's going well between us? What's harder? Where do we need to put more attention?" Not in a crisis moment, but regularly. This prevents small issues from becoming big problems. And something specific about resentment in later years. Sometimes what feels like resentment toward your partner is actually grief. Grief about aging, about lost possibilities, about the body changing, about mortality. If you're not careful, you'll direct that grief at your partner. But your partner isn't the source of it. The human condition is. And often, if you can name that grief directly, if you can say, "I'm angry because I'm afraid of getting older and dying," suddenly you have an opportunity to be allies in facing that fear, rather than enemies in your shared experience. I want to talk about retirement specifically, because it's such a pivot point for couples. And yet so many people don't really prepare for it relationally. Retirement sounds like freedom. And it is, in some ways. But it's also a profound identity crisis. Your partner may have spent 40 or 50 years defining themselves by their work. The moment that work ends, who are they? And if you're no longer organizing your days around your spouse's work schedule, if you're no longer rushing off to your own job, if you're no longer in that familiar rhythm, who are you as a couple? I see couples where one person was very work-focused and the other was focused on home and family. Retirement suddenly equalizes that in a strange way. The work-focused person now has endless time. The home-focused person suddenly has a partner underfoot all the time. The balance that took decades to establish gets disrupted. I remember thinking about this in my own marriage. My husband had been a surgeon, a demanding career that consumed enormous amounts of time and energy. I'd built a life around managing a household and family and my therapy practice. When he retired, there was this moment where I realized we didn't actually have a shared life. We had adjacent lives. And suddenly we had to figure out how to build something together. What made it work was actually talking about it before it happened. Before he retired, we started asking each other real questions. What are you hoping this phase of life will look like? What matters to you now? Are there things you've always wanted to do? How much time together do you want? What about time apart? These conversations are uncomfortable because they reveal how different you might actually be. But they're so much better than discovering your differences after retirement, when you're already frustrated with each other. I also encouraged couples not to assume that retirement means constant togetherness. Some couples thrive on it. Others need significant space. The best retirement couples I saw were the ones who had shared interests and separate interests. They did some things together and some things apart. They each had their own pursuits and friendships and passions, and those made them more interesting to each other, not less. There's also the identity piece. When work ends, or when parenting ends, or when both end at the same time, which happens sometimes, people can experience a profound loss of purpose. And if you're both experiencing that simultaneously, you can end up trying to fill that void with each other. But a partner can't provide everything. A partner is one source of meaning, but not the only source. I worked with couples to help them rediscover or discover new areas of meaning. For some, it was volunteering. For others, it was creative pursuits they'd deferred. For some, it was learning something new, travel, spiritual practice, connection with community. These things aren't distractions from your relationship. They're the fuel that keeps you interesting to each other and grounded in yourself. I also think about finances, because retirement changes everything financially. And money conflict is one of the biggest predictors of marital dissatisfaction. Different attitudes towards spending and saving, which were manageable when you had employment income, become central when you're living off fixed resources. I encouraged couples to sit down together, maybe with a financial advisor if that feels less emotionally charged, and actually plan together. Not one person managing finances and the other staying uninformed. Together. Because it's both your retirement. There's also the question of where to live. One partner might want to move closer to family or to a warmer climate. The other might want to stay in the community they've known for decades. These aren't small things. These are decisions about your life together. And I saw couples make these decisions without really discussing what each person needed and why. The couples who navigated retirement most successfully were the ones who approached it like a project, who asked each other questions, who were willing to have uncomfortable conversations, who recognized that this was a new chapter that needed new agreements, new rhythms, new ways of being together. I want to address two specific stressors that couples in their later years face, and they often come together: financial stress and caregiving strain. Financial stress in retirement is significant. You're no longer earning income generally. You're living off savings or pensions or social security. That's a fundamentally different relationship with money. And if you haven't had frank conversations about what your finances actually support, what you can afford, what trade-offs you're willing to make, well, that's when conflict emerges. I worked with couples where one person had assumptions about retirement travel that weren't actually possible given their financial reality. One couple wanted to leave an inheritance for their children, but that meant restricting their own quality of life. Another was torn between helping an aging parent and protecting their own retirement. These are real dilemmas, and they require real conversations, not avoidance. Financial conflict in retirement looks different than earlier in life. It's not usually about one person being irresponsible. It's usually about different values, different priorities, different fears. One person fears not having enough. Another fears missing out on experiences. One person wants security. Another wants adventure. And these aren't wrong or right. They're just different. The goal is to find a way to honor both as much as possible. I also encouraged couples to separate financial decisions from feelings about each other. Money decisions aren't about love or rejection. They're just logistics. But couples often layer emotions onto them. You don't want to go on vacation with me? Really, we can't afford it? You don't care about seeing the family? Really, the travel costs concern me. Naming the actual issue, separate from relationship meaning, often helps. Now, caregiving strain. If you're in a long-term relationship after 60, there's a decent possibility that one of you will need care, or that you'll both be navigating aging parents or adult children who need help. This can be beautiful, but it's also profoundly stressful. The couples who struggled most with caregiving strain were the ones who treated it as a task to manage rather than a shared reality to navigate. There's a difference. If caregiving becomes the sole focus of the relationship, if all your conversations are about logistics and health management, your relationship becomes functional rather than relational. And that's hard. I saw couples where one partner became the primary caregiver for the other's aging parent, and resentment built because they never acknowledged the sacrifice or the shift in their relationship. I saw couples where health issues emerged, and the person who wasn't sick felt abandoned and frightened, while the person who was sick felt like a burden. These are real challenges. What helped was honoring both the practical reality and the emotional reality. Yes, you need to manage medications and appointments. And yes, this is scary and hard and is changing your relationship. Acknowledging both things, Not just problem solving, but also feeling together. Creates space for the stress without it destroying your connection. I also encouraged couples to maintain some version of their relationship even during caregiving situations. Not abandoning each other to the logistics. Still having moments of real connection. Still making love when possible, even if it's different. Still having conversations that aren't about health. Still finding moments of joy or humor or tenderness. And practically speaking, caregiving is unsustainable without help. Whether that's professional care, family support, or community resources, couples need to accept help. Not because it's easier, but because trying to do everything alone destroys relationships. Let me leave you with some specific practices that I've found to be transformative in my own relationship and in the relationships I've worked with. First, the daily gratitude practice. Each evening, think of 3 things you appreciated about your partner that day. Not big things necessarily. She made coffee. He listened when I was upset. This practice actually rewires your brain toward noticing what's good rather than what's wrong. Second, the weekly check-in. 30 minutes, one person speaks while the other listens. You take turns. This maintains real connection and prevents issues from accumulating. Third, regular physical affection. Hold hands, hug, sit close. These micro moments of connection are foundational. Fourth, pursue your own interests and identity. Stay curious about life. Stay engaged. This makes you more interesting and more resilient. Fifth, practice what I call gentle presence. When your partner is upset or struggling, just be there. Not fixing or explaining. Just present. As our time together draws to a close, I want to circle back to something I said at the beginning, because it matters. What I've shared with you today are reflections from my own life and from the lives of hundreds of couples I've been privileged to work with. These aren't universal prescriptions. They're offerings. They're possibilities. Some of what I've said might resonate deeply with you. Some might not apply to your situation at all. And both of those things are perfectly okay. Your relationship is uniquely yours. The history you share. The specific ways you've hurt each other and healed together. The particular language you speak. The dreams you've built or abandoned. All of that is yours. What works for the couples I've described might not work for you, and that's not a failure. That's just reality. I want to emphasize again, if you're dealing with serious issues, if there's abuse, if there's addiction, if there's a crisis, please reach out to real professionals, a licensed therapist, a counselor, someone trained to work with the specific challenges you're facing. That's not a limitation. That's exactly what those professionals are there for. I also want to acknowledge that not all relationships can or should be saved. Sometimes couples come to the realization that they've grown in different directions, that their values have diverged, that the kindest thing they can do is to step apart. That's not a failure of love. Sometimes it's actually an expression of love. The recognition that you deserve to be with someone who's genuinely aligned with you. But if you're still here, if you're still wanting to find your way back to each other or forward to something new together, I want you to know it's possible. It's difficult, yes. It requires vulnerability and humility and a willingness to be wrong. But it's possible. What I know from my decades of work and from my own life is that long-term partnerships are one of the greatest teachers we have. They teach us about ourselves. They teach us about love that's chosen daily rather than felt as a moment. They teach us about forgiveness and acceptance and the profound privilege of being known by another human being. You've already invested decades in this person and this relationship. That's not nothing. That's a foundation. And if you can find the courage to tend that foundation, to keep it alive, to keep discovering each other. That's remarkable.
Thank you for sitting with me today, for opening your heart to these reflections, for caring enough about your relationship to think about how to improve it. That care in itself is everything. May you find peace. May you find moments of genuine connection with your partner. May you surprise each other with new versions of who you're becoming. And may you know, deeply, that your presence in this world matters. Take care of yourself. Take care of your heart. And if you need help, please reach out to someone qualified to give it. This conversation is just a beginning, not an ending.